You are amazed by the strength and energy in your avatar body, and how alert and quick your mind feels. As Sasha, you find yourself experiencing everything from emotions to physical sensations, exactly as it is playing out for Sasha. You hear a whistle. It sounds like the early morning trill of a songbird, but all of the men instantly and silently leap to their feet. In moments, horses appear and stand patiently in front of their riders. You scramble to your feet as your horse, a sturdy buckskin with a long black mane and tail, appears before you, bobbing its head up and down while eyeing an apple on the ground. 2 swords lay on the ground next to you. You place the swords in the belt around your waist, 1 sword on each hip, then hold out the apple for your horse. The horse drops its head to take the apple from your hand, and in one fluid motion you swing your leg over the horse's neck, and as it raises its head, you slide effortlessly onto its back. Riding bareback, you and the men leave the campsite without a word. The majority of the men are in their 20s, but a few are in their teens, so your lack of facial hair isn't noticeable. All of the men know that you're a woman and respect you. You are simply hiding this fact because you don't want to stand out in battle. For generations, your people, the Vedras, have lived in peace, but war has been thrust upon them. Less than 100 men had spent the night on the outskirts of a small village, and though the sun has not yet risen, children run out to greet you with wreaths woven from a variety of fresh herbs. A little girl running alongside you reaches up to hand you a wreath. You smile warmly and thank the girl as you slip the wreath over your forehead in the same fashion as the rest of the soldiers. A few minutes after leaving the village, you come to the edge of a flat rock plateau. Below is a broad expanse with a river running languidly through it. A gentle breeze springs up out of nowhere, blowing the softening night sky into a softer blue. The pink clouds have turned to vanilla cream and hover high in the firmament, reflecting the golden tones of the morning sun shimmering at the edge of the horizon. This time of year the meadows are usually speckled with colorful, fragrant wildflowers. But instead of the wind-swept scent of grass and flowers, a sickening burnt odor overwhelms your senses. You and the soldiers all dismount and creep to the edge of the precipice, then lay on your stomachs to observe the view below. Horror seizes you and takes your breath away. A deep, unimaginable sorrow overwhelms you as you look down at a small village freshly torched to the ground, with smoke spiraling from ashen heaps that had once been homes and gardens. Just beyond the wreckage, extending as far as the eye can see, the landscape is dotted not with wildflowers, but with tents and battle equipment, crushing the delicate beauty of the once pristine land. Over 1,000 horses are in the cavalry, and hundreds more are there for pulling the heavy equipment. Campfires are burning and thousands of soldiers are milling about, but they don't seem to be preparing for battle. The Vedras people have no cities, but they have a vast number of settlements that extend throughout what is now known as Russia. Mystical accounts of a lost civilization, a Shangri-La of sorts, referring to the Vedras' remarkable health and longevity, and the extraordinary flavor, size, and color of their produce, had gained the ear of Caesar himself. Hoping to avail himself of this acclaimed fountain of youth and expand his empire in the process, Caesar sent an elite Roman legion of 5,000 highly trained warriors to Russia. They set up their camp a mere stone's throw from the first small settlement they came to. A homing pigeon had delivered the news to your village. The Imperial Roman army had burned down the nearby settlement. The village elder had been locked in a cage, and the villagers had been shackled as slaves for their fearless refusal to feed the dark forces of Rome with food from their gardens. Shortly thereafter, Roman military runners arrived with messages stating that each village was to send representatives to pay tribute to the most powerful country of all. Those unable to pay would be taken into slavery or die. On the appointed day, when all the elders were expected to gather at the camp, the last thing the commander-in-chief expected was 90 young men, including you in disguise, walking into camp at dawn, leading your horses. Though none of you have armor, helmets, or shields, it's obvious from the swords at your sides that you are all prepared to fight. You and the young warriors all stand quietly in front of a large carpeted podium, adorned with red silk fabric trimmed in gold. On the dais stands a throne and a massive metal cage where Raza, the Vedrus elder, is imprisoned like a giant bird, with nothing more than a bowl of water. Duty-bound, the commander, well-dressed but completely disheveled, with his black hair at odds with his head, climbs the steps and wearily flops on the stone with a cluster of red grapes in his hand. He appears as one who had indulged his senses excessively the night before, and has no business seeing the sun prior to noon. With a yawn and a loud belch, he surveys you and the other Vedrus apathetically. Much like a cat toying with a mouse, the commander tosses grape after grape at Raza through the bars of the cage, while indulging in his egocentric discourse.
Raza, I've ordered the elders of your settlements to pay tribute and to hear the decrees of our emperor. Where are they, and why are these lads here?
He says, throwing another grape through the bars.
Stand up when I speak to you, he commands.
White-haired Raza appears no more than 40, but in fact he is well over 100 years old. When he stands up in his cage, he is impressively tall, even amidst the elite warriors standing on the platform. Though pitifully thin, he is nothing like a man starved and mentally beaten into submission. Raza's blue eyes are blazing, and his passion is palpable. With calm certainty, belying the apparent hopelessness of his situation, Raza responds in a surprisingly relaxed manner, as if he already knows the outcome. The elders know what you want. They don't like you, and they've decided not to meet someone they don't like. You are here to do battle. These lads look ready to fight. Then, looking directly at the young man, he adds, "Is that so?" The young man leading your group gravely nods in agreement.
"This is absurd,"
bellows the commander, thinking of what a waste it would be to end up with a bunch of dead bodies instead of slaves for his emperor.
"Old man, these lads will listen to you. Tell them to surrender now, and I'll spare their lives. They will become slaves, but at least they won't die senselessly."
Raza addresses you and the men.
"As you know, these forces are unequal to your own."
The commander relaxes a bit in the knowledge that Raza will talk some sense into these impetuous young men, and whispers to a guard to prepare for prisoners. The elder continues, "My sons, your thoughts move swiftly. I ask that you spare the lives of these men. Do not kill them all. Teach them to put down their weapons and forever turn away from the games of war. Exasperated, the commander barks,
"You have just ordered the death of all these men. I'll give the orders now."
"It's too late. They understand what I've asked, and they won't kill you." Before the commander can respond, you and the young warriors leap onto your horses and gallop at full speed toward the main camp. The commander orders a detachment of archers to shoot, and though they are ill-prepared for the moment, they finally dispatch a round of arrows. But just as the arrows come within range, you and the other warriors jump off of your horses and run alongside them. As the arrows shoot past, a hissing blur just above your heads. As soon as you get close to the Roman troops, the Vedras soldiers split into two groups. One group circles around the troops that have already gathered together, and the other group, which you're in, begins cutting through the troops that are still hastily trying to come together in the midst of unforeseen chaos. From childhood, all Vedras children played games and created artwork with both hands. They were not only equally adept on both sides of their bodies, but this also developed both hemispheres of the brain equally, causing their minds to be lightning fast. There was nothing considered more important in the world of the Vedras than the ability to accelerate their thinking. They knew that no opponent, no matter how powerful, could outmaneuver one who could think more quickly. Unlike their Roman counterparts who used 10% of their mental capacity at best, the Vedras accessed 100% of their intellectual abilities. In so doing, they could send and receive information telepathically. This was as natural to them as it would be for someone to speak their own native language. To understand the speed of the Vedras' thought, imagine a bullet coming toward you. But if your mind moves more quickly than a bullet, then from your perspective, the bullet would appear to be moving in slow motion. This is why people often describe an accident as happening in slow motion. Their mind has departed the confines of the body and is observing the event from an unencumbered mental perspective. Hence, the appearance of the event taking place slowly. Still running on the ground, with a sword in each hand and without armor to slow you down, you are able to disarm and wound your opponents without so much as a scratch on your body. Yet you're not a trained warrior. None of you are. As children, you grew up playing sword games, followed by more complex versions you played as adults, where you relied on telepathy to outmaneuver your opponents. While the Romans were hearing words, "Your thoughts move swiftly. I ask that you spare the lives of these men." The Vedras elder was simultaneously projecting mental images, which were seen clearly by all of the young warriors. For the warriors, it was much like viewing a mind movie and being shown exactly how the entire battle would play out. Every Vedras warrior saw himself and the other warriors in this mental movie, and all of you instantly knew exactly what to do. Even before you began fighting, you knew you didn't need to kill anyone. The images in your mind sent by the elder showed disarmed and wounded troops littering the battlefield, and subsequently stopping the reserve soldiers from making any headway or taking over from the original troops. In your mind's eye, you saw your group cutting its way back to the tent of the commander-in-chief and taking him hostage. And this is exactly what you did. 2 men put a gunny sack over the commander's head, tied it at his waist, and threw him over the rump of a horse. In the meantime, you released Raza the elder from his cage and gave him a horse. Communicating with you and the troops through mental imagery, the young commander showed you how to get the commander out of the camp. Following the projected images, you create a protective oval with the commander-in-chief at the center. But rather than return the way you had come, you push forward until you pass through the throng of soldiers. You pay no attention to the fact that you are surrounded by seasoned soldiers twice your size. You focus on each one as if you're playing a game. In the same way that modern-day children and adults play baseball or soccer, Vedra's children and adults played a game with a sword in each hand. The sword tips were dipped in vegetable dye, and the point of the game was to tag your opponents with the dye without harming them. The highest points were awarded not for tagging spots that were fatal, such as the heart or throat, but places that were the most difficult to access, such as fingertips or toes. As children, they learned to play one-on-one, but as adults, they played all at once, sometimes one against many and sometimes in teams. Having practiced this game your entire life, your mental focus causes you to be flawlessly accurate and utterly unafraid. From the point of view of an observer, it would appear that all of the Vedras had eyes in the back of their heads. But in fact, they knew how to go out of body while fighting. Imagine sitting in a class and listening to a teacher while daydreaming at the same time. It's like being two places at once. In a similar way, you and the Vedras are fighting while daydreaming that you are high above the battleground, observing everything that is happening. Except in your case, you are seeing exactly what is occurring, and you are all capable of seeing what is coming, as if it's a battle scene playing out in slow motion. You and all the other Vedras hold a mental image of all of you arriving safely at the other side of the battlefield, galloping away. Exactly as each one of you envisioned it, you all jump on your horses and gallop to the top of a nearby hill. All of you, except 2 watchmen, then jump off your horses and lay in the grass with your arms outstretched, falling immediately asleep while your horses graze nearby. This may seem like something that could never happen in real life, because most people rarely experience anything in the way they picture it in their minds. But in fact, this is part of Russian history that has been maintained in such strict secrecy that there are only a handful of people alive who know this is true. The Vedras practiced a form of white magic that disappeared from the earth thousands of years ago. True white magic is harmless. This form of magic cannot be tainted or used selfishly. It simply won't work unless the intention of those performing the magic is for the highest good of all. This is why Raza, the elder, said, "I ask that you spare the lives of these men. Teach them to put down their weapons and forever turn away from the games of war." By asking all of the Vedras warriors to intend the highest good for all, knowing that the Roman soldiers were simply doing their job and following orders, Raza was activating ancient white magic, which allowed the direct transmission of assistance from the unseen realms. But the battle isn't over yet. Back in the Roman camp, the officers are blaming each other for the colossal fiasco that now ensues. Without their commander-in-chief, they argue about who should take charge and what should be done next. At long last, after much arguing and deliberation, it is decided they will send the majority of their cavalry, nearly 1,000 troops, after the Vedras with a few hundred in reserve following at a distance. The moment the troops begin leaving the camp, a Vedras watchman blows his horn, waking you and the other men. Now well rested, thanks to the time wasted in all the internal chaos at the Roman camp, all of you immediately jump up and begin running alongside your horses. It takes some time, but the cavalry gradually begins to catch up. When the Romans are nearly upon you, they sound their battle horn, The Roman soldiers whip and spur their horses, already frothing at the mouth from the strain of the riders and all the armor being carried, into a full gallop. But at the same time, you and the other Vedras stop running, jump on your horses, and gallop easily ahead. The Roman soldiers, fully ignited by their close proximity to you and the Vedras, keep whipping their horses onward, trying to close the ever-expanding gap. Finally, they slow down as their commander realizes there is now an impossible distance between you. You and the Vedras stop, and the Roman commander and Raza are given fresh horses. Once again, all of you dismount and rest while the horses graze. During this time, the Roman cavalry presses on without a break or water for their horses. At last, the Romans spot you and the Vedras not too far ahead. Again, their battle horn blasts, and the cavalry whips their horses into a gallop. Springing into action, you and the Vedras run alongside your horses, only jumping on to gallop away when the Romans are little more than an arrow's shot behind you. At this point, the frothing cavalry horses, beaten to exhaustion, begin falling to their knees. Some horses fall over dead, pinning their riders underneath them. At last, the Roman cavalry commander calls, "All rest!" But it's too late. Horses are lying all over the field, and those that had not succumbed to fatigue were shaking from the energy expended. You and the Vedras warriors suddenly spin around and bear down on the fatigued cavalry. The Roman soldiers had no horses, and though they tried to retreat back to the reserve cavalry, it was hopeless. Many fell to the ground in exhaustion after a vain attempt to run in their armor. The few that are able to fight are wounded or disarmed by the Vedras, but none of you touched the soldiers who had fallen. Finally, seeing all the Vedras fresh and well-rested with a sword in each hand, the Roman cavalry drops to their knees, places their swords on the ground in front of them, and surrenders. The Romans anticipated the wrath of the Vedras, but instead, you and the other warriors dismount, remove the wreaths from your heads, and apply the grass and herbs to stop the blood flow from the wounded soldiers. As you attend to their wounds, you and the other Vedras speak to the Roman soldiers about a way of life in harmony with man and nature, and without war. On the battlefield, the commander-in-chief is safely returned to his regiment. At the same time, you are applying some of the herbs from your wreath to stop the flow from a gash on a young Roman soldier's head. Without a word, he looks at you as you speak soothingly to him and dress his wounds. He is tall, deeply tanned, and very rugged-looking for one who is barely 20, but his eyes are deep liquid brown. It seems to you as if he is looking right through you, and you feel strangely weak, though you're not tired. There is a deep familiarity about him which makes no sense. You know you've never met him before, yet when it's time to move on to the next soldier, you feel a gripping feeling in your heart about leaving him. You hesitate and look into his eyes searchingly as he returns your gaze. Finally, the Vedras horn blows, calling all of you back together. You gather with the other Vedras warriors, but you can't help looking back to see the Roman soldier. Much to your surprise, he has removed all of his armor and is walking away from the battlefield, following the Vedras at a distance. As night falls, and you are camping out under the stars, you wonder about the soldier. You fall asleep, staring up at the stars, wondering who he is and why he seems so familiar.